in your minds. Okay, Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our lives are made up of relationships, aren't they? Whether they're the ones that we love and embrace or the ones that we try and avoid, in some way those relationships shape us. And so whether we're talking about teacher-child relationships, employer-employee, friendships, even the way that we relate to politics and government, spouses, all of these relationships help to shape us and define us in some way. And if they define us, they also define our culture and the society that we live in. But there is no relationship that has the kind of society-shaping impact of the parent-child relationship. Where this functions well on a large scale, society functions well. Where this dysfunctions, so does our society. Parent-child relationships are meant to be built on nurture and trust and honor and growth. And so therefore, given that all that Paul has been talking about in this latter part of Ephesians is what lives look like as this new humanity patterned after Jesus, it's no surprise that he's got some things to say about the parent-child relationship, and particularly how these redeemed parent-child relationships can have such a powerful impact. Now, bear in mind that these words that we've just read are actually flowing from Ephesians 5, verse 18. And Ephesians 5, verse 18 says, "Don't get drunk with wine, for this leads to debauchery, a loss of restraint, a lack of control. Instead, go on being filled by the Spirit." And a mark of being filled by the Spirit is praise and thanksgiving towards God, but then also this willingness to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And remember that what this means, and we looked at this a few weeks back, this idea of submitting to one another is voluntarily placing ourselves under another. It's moving towards the good of the other person, even at cost to ourselves, and all because we recognize that this is what Jesus has done. The one who was in very nature God, did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he made himself nothing. He poured himself out. And so we want to do the same for others because this is the example that Christ has given us. Now, the Bible speaks a lot about all of these relationships, but it has a lot to say about the child-parent relationship. And Proverbs contains stacks on this, absolutely stacks. And so just a couple of examples. First of all, a word to the children. "My son, keep your father's command and do not forsake your mother's teaching." Now, this assumes that the father's command and the mother's teaching is coming from God, that they've taken on God's kind wisdom, and that's what they're passing on to the child. And so if that's the case, if this is God's kind wisdom, bind them on your heart, fasten them around your neck. Let this be the thing that kind of moves you, that controls you. When you walk, they'll guide you. When you sleep, they'll watch over you. When you awake, they'll speak to you. Isn't that the kind of wisdom that we want to live according to? And then a word to the parents. "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he's old, he will not depart from it." Now, I do think it's important to acknowledge that Proverbs are not promises and that these are guidelines and not guarantees. Nevertheless, they are the wisdom of God. And when we submit ourselves to the wisdom of God, the odds of things going better dramatically increase because God's wisdom is best. And so here's where we're going this morning. I want us to think first about children, and then we're going to think about parents. But the most important thing, when you go away this morning, I don't want you thinking, "Oh, we had a sermon on parenting," or even we had a sermon on childrening. Instead, this is ultimately about God. This is about who he is and what he's like, and that's kind of what I want us to go away with this morning. And I do apologize for drinking a lot. It's that, that smoky pick. So I've got a smoky pick this morning, so I'm trying to offset that, okay? So first of all then, about children. I think this is a fair comment. Every culture has managed to get children wrong. And so the culture that we currently live in is, the term Disneyfication has been used to describe how, if you watch any kind of Disney programs, there's this sense that the adults are really, really stupid, and the kids are the ones that know everything that's going on, and the kids ultimately should be allowed to be the ultimate authorities in their own lives and in the whole universe. And I think that's just sort of human rebellion bleeding out, isn't it, into those programs. But then you go to the opposite extreme, which was Paul's culture, where children were regarded as being almost kind of invisible, ignored, valueless. Every culture seems to manage to get kids wrong. And yet, Paul's got a different and better way for us. Paul is a man who is speaking from outside of his culture. He's a man outside of his time. Next week, we won't be here. And so Tom Lloyd will be here, which I'm gutted to miss out on, but he's going to be speaking about slaves, masters, and how to read the Bible. That actually Paul is a man outside of time. He's speaking from the perspective of the culture of the kingdom of heaven. And actually that perspective speaks into every age and every culture. This is outside of time. It's a different and a better way. And Paul is speaking to children as being morally responsible disciples of Jesus. And so at the point where a child is able to kind of, I don't know what the word is, when they're conscious of their surroundings and they're able to begin to make decisions for themselves, then actually we should treat them as being able to be morally responsible disciples of Jesus. And again, this is revolutionary, right? Because remember how we looked a few weeks back that there was this thing called the house code, where the thinkers of their day spoke to men as fathers and husbands and masters, but didn't really speak to the wives, the children, and the servants. They were the ones that could almost kind of be ignored. And yet Paul, when he's giving this kind of revolutionary house code for Christians, actually speaks to the ones with the least perceived authority first. And he speaks to the children here. And he says, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Now, the words that he uses here actually would have been very, very familiar to a Jewish audience, because honor your father and mother was the fifth commandment. And so now he's applying this to all children. And so the idea is that if you've got a child that is kind of living under the authority of the parent within the home, then actually they should obey the parent. But then every child, at whatever age, should honor their parents. And so honor is for all ages. Now, we'll come to what it means to obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, in a moment. I want to think about honor first. And so honor is this idea of esteeming your parents, of regarding them as significant. Ultimately, I guess the thing is with your parents, they are the reason you exist. They are, well, outside of God, they're the human reason why you exist. They are your source of life. And so to recognize them as such comes with a promise. And this promise that it may go well with you and you may live long in the land is actually it's got a backdrop. So God's people had been in slavery in Egypt. They'd just been brought out of slavery. They're now at Mount Sinai, and God's given them the terms of the covenant. This is what it means for you to be my people and for me to be your God. And so I'm sharing my godly wisdom with you people. I'm expecting you then to pass that on to your kids and to respond to this kind wisdom. And actually, if you respond to this kind wisdom and then you pass that on to your children and your children honor that and they take that kind wisdom on for themselves, you've just got generation after generation after generation of people who are living according to God's wisdom, which again is no guarantee, but it dramatically increases the odds of things going better. Does that make sense? But the thing is, honor and obedience have their boundaries. Now let's think about obeying your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Now, we want to try and get to grips with what Paul had in mind when he said this. You know, if I say to one of my kids, we're going home after after the meeting, and we need something from Tesco. And I say, but you know what? I don't want to pay for it. So can you go on the Rob, please? And can you get XYZ for me from Tesco? Now, do you think that that's what Paul had in mind when he said, obey your parents? No, I hope not. Because actually, if you sat there going, yes, you should do everything your parents tell you to do. No, that's a really bad idea. Now, that's quite black and white, isn't it? And often the kind of decisions that Christian children are faced with are a bit more grayscale than that. Now, this is where I want to be really, really clear. And I am speaking largely to the sort of the younger contingent here. The default is obedience unless it means clearly disobeying God. Okay? So this isn't about preferences, okay? Obeying your parents in the Lord means that as long as they're asking you to do things that line up with Jesus, then actually to do that with joy is a real blessing for you. The default is obedience unless it means disobeying God. And you see this right throughout Scripture. You think about Daniel and his friends. Obviously, this wasn't a parent-child thing, but they were given instruction. They obeyed those instructions until it came to the point where they would be disobeying God. And then they said, we can't disobey God. This isn't about preferences. This isn't about, like, there's a list of chores that you're saying, do you know what? I don't think Jesus wants me to do that. Okay? That's not the way that it works at all. In fact, that's quite the opposite, because he's calling us all to be those who serve and to love and to place ourselves under for the good of the other. Peter and John, they said, should we obey man rather than God? And so this only comes into play where what you're being asked to do would cause you to disobey God. Otherwise, the call to obey in the Lord is to obey. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, come back to me. And so that's the boundaries on obedience. But honoring also has boundaries. Honor is directed towards the person. To esteem the person doesn't necessarily esteem all of their decisions and all of their actions. It doesn't validate their actions. And I think this is really pertinent for those of us that are in parent-child relationships where we're all adults. Honoring doesn't necessarily mean trusting when the person has proven to be untrustworthy. Honoring it absolutely does not mean ignoring or remaining under abuse. It doesn't mean having no boundaries. Because often parents can, particularly in adult relationships, parents can overstep, they can guilt load, they can manipulate, they can try and control. I mean, actually, financial control is actually a marker of abuse in adult parent-child relationships. And so it means that we can honor our parents. We can honor them as a person without giving in to unreasonable demands. Now, the question is, how do we know if those demands are unreasonable? Well, this is where we need discernment from the Spirit. Now, I appreciate that, like some of this, it treads on quite sacred ground, doesn't it? It treads on quite difficult ground for many of us. And I'm aware that it's okay. It was probably quite a good moment, actually, because I think it's like, when you're talking about stuff like this, you almost need like a little sort of emotional decompress, don't you, before you can kind of come back in and think about some of the challenging stuff. Because the reality is that this all works really well in ideal relationships. It works really well when people are submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. But where that's not happening, then it means that you can have parent-child relationships that haven't set you up well for living long in the land, that haven't set you up well for living a blessed life and have left you with scars and trauma. I think it's so important for us to recognize who God is in this, that God is a good, good Father. And I kind of toyed with which way round to say these things, because these two things are both true. That God, in his goodness, as Paul says, is able to make all things work together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. And at the same time, that making all things work together for good doesn't make these things disappear. It doesn't erase these things. But what it does is he turns them for good. He is the ultimate recycler, and he is able to recycle these things for good. And that's just the kind of God that he is. And I want to say that if this kind of stirs up stuff that's painful or difficult, we are going to be making space later on for people to be prayed with. Because this really matters, and it matters because God wants to minister into these things, and he wants us to be healed and whole. But the reality is that for many of us, we've had good parents. We've had good parents who poured themselves out for us, who loved us, who cared for us, who were sacrificial for us, and they've left us with emotional damage. And both of those things can be true at the same time. We've often said to our kids in the aftermath of a parenting fail, when we're kind of unpacking it, and we say, that's going to show up in your counseling in years to come. Because the reality is that we're such mixed bags as people. And so we want to be able to thank God for what we can thank God for in our parents. We want to be able to express our gratitude where we're able to our parents. And where there are things that happened in our bringing up that we don't want to pass on, then by God's grace, we get to be the point where those cycles are broken. So that's children. But now about parents. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now remember how Paul flipped the kind of house codes, and so spoke to the ones with the kind of least perceived authority first, and then directed his attention to the ones with the most perceived power and authority. And in his day, the ones that had the most kind of social capital in the parent-child relationship were the fathers. And what he's saying is, here's the principle. The one that has the most power in the relationship, do not use your power to provoke. And I think in our culture today, that also speaks to mothers. This speaks to parents. And this is why it flows from Ephesians 5, verse 18, which said, don't get drunk with wine, for that's debauchery. That leads to being out of control. Instead, go on being filled by the Spirit. Because when we're filled by the Spirit, the fruit that the Spirit produces is love and self-control. And so it means then that the kind of the power that we have in relationships is a power that is marked by love and self-control. And so what does this look like in kids' lives? If we're not supposed to provoke our kids to anger, are we supposed to let them have all their own way? Have the run, child. Do whatever you want. Oh, good gracious me, no. That is not moving towards the good of the child. We move towards their good at cost to ourselves out of reverence for Christ when we recognize that we've been given a stewardship, a responsibility to form and to shape these lives through sacrificial love, through discipline and instruction, to form the whole person, to become the person that God has created them to be. And discipline and instruction is for formation of the child. It's not about punishment. It's not about retribution. It's with their good in mind. And honestly, good discipline is costly. Here's the thing, parents, right? And actually this is to anyone who ever takes care of a child in any context, okay? If you say something to a child, you got to follow through with it, okay? Kids can smell blood. They're sharks. And so, if you say something, and I say this as one who was a child at one point and could smell blood and was a shark. For example, you go to the, and so you've got to be so careful what you say. You've got to be willing to follow through with it. You go to the supermarket. Kid starts kicking off. They start larging it in the supermarket, ragdoll. And you say to them, if you carry on, then we're going to have to leave. What do? Ragdoll. You got to leave. You got to go. You can't then carry on. Trolley full of stuff. You got to leave it there. Like, that's what you got to do. Or worse still, you're doing something that is lots and lots of fun that the whole family have been waiting to do. Kid, ragdolls. You carry on doing that, we're going to have to go. What do? They ragdoll. What do you need to do? You need to leave. You got to go. You've got to be good to your word. And so if you threaten something, you've got to be willing to follow through with it because good boundaries are actually for the kindness of the child. If you don't put good boundaries in, it's not kindness to the child. And this was a lesson that I learned long before I had kids. I was a young teacher, 23 years of age, and I was going into, like, I wanted my kids to be I wanted them to achieve the best that they could possibly achieve. But secretly, I wanted them to like me as well. And so as I'm going into these first, like for most of my first classes, it wasn't a problem because they were nice kids. But then I had this one class, set 10 of 12. Oh my goodness. And I wanted them to like me. I thought, this is a troublesome class. If I can just get them on side, then they'll like me. They'll think I'm wonderful. And for 3 months, they ran me absolutely ragged. What an absolute failure. And I had a mentor who watched this all go on, and he let it play out. He didn't enter into this. He thought, no, do you know what? I'm just going to let this kid figure this out on his own. And after 3 months, I said to him, I'm losing sleep. Like, these kids are costing me my life. 3 times a fortnight, I'm living with this pit in my stomach. And he said, yeah, because the thing is, Paul, kids actually love strong boundaries because they recognize that you care enough to put the boundaries in place. And so he worked with me from a distance, and we put those boundaries in place. And at first, and it was never about retribution, it was never about punishment, but it was about attrition. I had to dig in. Like, this was like, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to be consistent, I'm going to be consistent. And like, it was hard, it cost. But by the end of 2 years of teaching that class, they were actually my favorite class. I can still remember most of their names now. I can remember conversations that we had. And this is like nearly 30 years ago. We were best of friends by the end of it. And the reason we were best of friends at the end of it was because they recognized that I cared enough to put boundaries in place with them. And that's a teacher-pupil thing, but I think the same applies with our kids. The idea of the discipline and instruction of the Lord is that we model to our children. And again, this isn't just about parents. This is the whole community together. We model imperfectly the life of discipleship to Jesus. Yes. We love our kids with boundaries. That's, we show them that we love them by kind of protecting them, keeping them from danger. But there are so many ways that we can embitter our kids. And I guess in years of spending time with people, the same kind of things pop up over and over again, sort of wounds from the past. And so I guess this is kind of like frequently asked questions, the how to provoke your kids to anger version, because these are just some of the things that kind of popped up repeatedly. And they're quite surprising. The first one, not explaining why. Kid does something. You say, here's your consequence. And they're like, yeah, but that wasn't quite what happened. And you're like, shh. And they say, yeah, but that's not what happened. You need to, psh. And they say, yeah, but if I didn't do that, then the consequence isn't fit. Shh. And you just make them do this consequence without them understanding what was the heart behind it. And as kids grow older, taking time to explain that the heart behind the boundaries is so important, because we need them not to get provoked and frustrated and angered. We need them just to understand, what is the heart of care in this? What's the heart of love in this? What's the reason why you're not allowed to do that? What's the reason why, when you did that, we put this boundary in place for you? It's so important. But then the next thing is that we don't want to set our kids up for failure. The things that we're asking them to do, are they actually able to do those things? Lisa was wonderful for me in this because I was utterly clueless as a sort of newer parent. Paul, he's one. Of course he can't take his dishes to the sink. But then you kind of learn, what's the capacity of your child? And I mean, we've talked about this many times, and I have his permission to share this. So, I think this was one of those moments which wouldn't show up in counseling. I think this was one of those ones where actually I think we did okay. He was 2.5. He could speak in very, very full sentences, and he could name dinosaurs. He could tell me what an elasmosaurus was and at what era it existed, and probably how long its femur bone was as well. And so we're sat at the dinner table one day, and he wants something off the table, and I say please. No. Say please. No. Okay. So very calmly, we take a little walk out into the hallway, and we sit on the stairs, and I say, you can go back to the table, you can eat your food when you're ready to say please. Are you ready to say please? I'm ready to go back to the table. Are you ready to say please? I am ready to join the family. Are you ready to say please? I'm ready to eat my food. 40 minutes. 40 minutes we sat there, and then finally through tears, mine as well, because my food had gone cold. And he says, I'm ready to say please, thank you, Lord. And this was never about winning a battle. This was about forming a person. But we don't want to set our kids up for failure. And the last common example that comes up is don't live through your kids. We want our kids to live up to the full capacity of everything that God has created them for. We want them to steward all that they've been made for the best, to the full. But we never want to live out our ambitions through our kids. We never want them to kind of be the people that we could never be, and then subtly move them towards the things that we didn't achieve. Because ultimately that stops them becoming the people that God has created them to be. It creates frustration, it creates pain. And then I guess here's a little kind of, it's almost like a bonus one here. And this is one that just has kind of come up over and over again. As Brits, we love banter, don't we? It's a very, very British thing. And yet developing children often don't understand the kind of heart of banter. And the number of people that have told me this, that they do their very best in school, they'd go home and they'd have 70% in a test, and they go, I got 70% in my test. And the response of the parent wasn't, oh, well done, good job. How did you achieve that? Did your teacher give you any kind of pointers as to what the next steps are? No, they say, what happened to the other 30%? Now the parent thinks that is absolutely hilarious, and yet that becomes a wound for the kid, because the kid goes home thinking, or lives in their home thinking, I'm not enough. It's never good enough. It's never good enough. And they don't understand that that's the thing. It's like years later that they realize that after having that said to them so many times, that's the thing that made them think, I'm not good enough. We have to be so careful in what we speak to our kids. I think the question is that in all of the interactions that we have with young people, whether we're parents or not, are we using the authority that we have for their good, or are we using it somehow to serve a need in us? And this is so tricky. And parenting is so tricky. It's like tightrope walking on a razor wire with no shoes on, and nobody gives you any training for it. And that's why in community we need to look out for one another. And where there are things that we find difficult in parenting, we need to seek advice. And this isn't just about, you find the people who've got the golden children. No, you find the people who actually found it really hard, so that they can tell you the things that they found hard, and they can use their experience for your good. We need one another, and we need community in this. And as parents, we may be very well aware of our failures. And the answer in that isn't to go into an Eeyore death spiral. If there are things that we need to seek forgiveness for, we need to have the humility to do that. Even if the things that we did with the best of intentions. Because, humbly seeking forgiveness. I remember the first time that I had to say to one of my kids, I'm sorry, I was wrong, will you forgive me? And you can almost, I'm sorry, I was wrong, choking on the words. But actually, to seek forgiveness of your child is to pursue their good over your own, where that's necessary. And it has the power to restore marred relationships and to strengthen already strong relationships. But I also know that there are parents here, you poured yourselves out for your kids. You did the absolute best, and in spite of that, are carrying pain and sadness for the way that things have worked out. The Lord sees, the Lord knows, and He cares. And you know, I really want to encourage you. There are stories that are still incomplete. There are prayers that are as yet unanswered, and He's saying, keep praying those prayers. Keep bringing them before me, because I know, I care, and I am able. Parenting and bringing up kids in community, so not just parents, but us all, it's an absolute joy, and it's such a privilege, and it's super tricky. And that's why we need to grow in the Spirit and become like the perfect Father, seeking the best for our kids, moving towards their good, not living through them. And you know, all of this, whether we are parents or children, it has to be patterned on the perfect Father and the perfect Son, and empowered by the perfect Spirit. I said this is not a sermon about parenting. This is about God. This is about who God is and what He's like. Because remember that Paul said in chapter 5, verse 1, therefore, be imitators of God as dearly loved children. What Jesus has accomplished for us is that we are becoming like Him. We're becoming people who are being kind of retrofitted for a new creation. We were created to image God. And so how then do we model God-likeness as parents? And how do we model God-likeness as children? Well, let's think about, first of all, God as perfect Father. I think there's weeks and weeks and weeks worth of sermons that we could have on this, and I've literally got 3 minutes and 3 points, okay? So go away, do your own meditation on God as perfect Father. Part of the problem is that often when it comes to fathers and parents in general, the way that our parents were with us shapes our view of who God is, and we don't let God identify Himself. And so we may have this view of God that, you know, is what you prayed this morning earlier on, that we overlay this picture of our experience of fatherhood onto God, and we need to let God tell us who He is. Psalm 103 says that as the Lord shows compassion to His as a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear Him. This word compassion, like, I don't know how you envisage God, how you picture God, and yet this word compassion means, you know, when you see something that really draws out all your emotions, it kind of moves you to your guts. If God had, like, literal guts, He would be moved to them. Like, he's a God who engages Himself with our needs. He shows a tender care, and that tender care is so costly to Him. Not only is He compassionate, but He is also loving. And you know, sometimes when we think that God is love, we think, oh yeah, well, He loves, but it's in a kind of distant, dispassionate kind of way. I love what John says here. See how great is the love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. Lavished. Think lavish, okay? Imagine lavish for a second. We don't even have the imagination capacity to imagine just how lavish the love of God is. He is not mean and withholding. He pours Himself out in love, and His love is strong. It is generous. It is holy. It is joy-filled. It is gracious. He leans in towards us to share the benefit of all that He is with us. He is self-generous. And His love is joyful. Parents in the room, you know, the joys that you experience over your kids, they are just a tiny drop in the ocean compared to the joy and delight that God the Father has over His children. He doesn't delight in everything that we do, but He delights in us. And He loves us. In Christ, He loves us. And He's also so generous. If you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask Him? Now, does He give us everything that we want? No, he doesn't. But he wisely discerns what we need. He gives good gifts. And so, even in those 3 verses, what you've got is this picture of a God who is overwhelmingly compassionate, lavishly loving, generously, wisely gift-giving. That's just scratching the surface of who he is. How do we become these kind of parents? How do we become these kind of people? Paul told us, we go on being filled by the Spirit with the fullness of God. But then as children, how do we imitate God? The eternal Son of God shows us the way. Do you know, the night before his death, in his humanity, Jesus is wrestling before God. He's wrestling before his Father. And yet he expresses his trust in the Father and he says, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." We display Christ-likeness by trusting our Heavenly Father and submitting to his will in everything. And you know, when you realize that this Father that we're submitting ourselves to is one who is compassionate, lavishly loving, and generously, wisely, discerningly gift-giving, it becomes so much easier to entrust ourselves to him, because this is who he is. And it's in entrusting ourselves to him that we are also, bless you, we're also able to honor our earthly parents. And how do we live in this place of obedient trust to God? We go on being filled by his Spirit. Do you know, church, I said at the start that there is no relationship that has more power to shape a culture and a society than healthy parent-child relationships. As we become imitators of God, living as dearly loved children, we become empowered by the Spirit to break cycles that may have persisted in our families for many generations. Think about parent-child. Try and imagine this for a second, okay? A whole host of parent-child relationships that are transformed by the Spirit of God to begin to display this perfect parent. I know we're never going to get to perfect relationships this side of heaven, okay? But imagine these relationships that are in process of being transformed. Imagine those kind of children that find themselves in schools. Imagine those parents that find themselves in workplaces. The way that they speak about their family relationships, and what they demonstrate when they're on display together, not perfect, but being transformed. Imagine the impact that these kind of relationships can have. They have such power to display the beauty of the coming kingdom to a world that so desperately needs the King and his kingdom, and to have a transformative impact on our society. So we're coming into land, and here's what I want to encourage us towards. During our response time, I want to make space for people to pray and to be prayed with. For those of you that are carrying wounds and hurts, past and present, there is one who is able to minister into those wounds. For those of you that are carrying prayers that are unanswered for whether for your parents or for your children, I think particularly for those of you who have prayed long for your children, I want to make space for you to be prayed with too. But as I've been praying this week, and I don't say this lightly, but I feel like there might be some here who have lived their childhoods as rebellion against a good, loving parental authority in their homes, and that kind of rebellious heart has continued into adulthood. And where it shows up in your life, it isn't like an overt rebellion, but it's an internal unwillingness to submit to others, an unwillingness to seek the good of others above your own, an unwillingness to see others as of more significant than yourself, an unwillingness to learn from others. And here's the thing. that hampers your enjoyment and your experience of living in God's family, because that's not how God's family functions. The Father loves so lavishly that he gives his Son. The Son lays down his life. He takes the very nature of a servant. And that's the kind of likeness that he's calling us into. And living in that place of unresolved rebellion actually is hurting rather than helping you. It's as we, by the fullness of the Spirit, submit to one another that we begin to experience the joy of life that is united to our humble King and to one another. And so, if you feel like that speaks to you this morning, please come and pray with me. But here's a moment to trust him. Think about how he has moved towards you in Christ at great cost to himself. He can be trusted. But let's respond now with worship. We come to a perfect Father who has lavished perfect, everlasting love on us in his Son. And as we yield to him by his Spirit, he is forming us to live as dearly loved children. Shall we stand together?